Okay, I think we're on. We're going to bring Christina in here in just a moment. Let me get ourselves set up. I'll go ahead and send out the link here on a couple. And let's take a look. So if you're coming in here, welcome. And this is our more or less regular live stream that we do here with teachers. Christina's coming in right now. So we do this with the teachers of Luma Learn, and periodically we'll bring in people from other resources as well, but we like to give you the opportunity to get to know our teachers. So, hello Christina, how are you?
Hi, Priscilla. Good. How are you?
I'm doing good.
Good.
It is a Monday though, so sometimes those hit you when you're not expecting it. So they catch you off guard. You're like, oh, weekend's done already. Though I don't always get much of a weekend, but I'm gonna go ahead and send out the link in a couple places here.
Okay.
So we can make sure that everybody knows that we're on, and then our discussion that we're gonna start with is talking about. I know we kind of mentioned it ahead of time, so you shouldn't be completely going into this cold, but talking about critical thinking and homeschooling. This is, to me, this is kind of an interesting thing. For one, I teach critical thinking, so it's interesting to me, but I'm interested to hear a little bit of what your thoughts are on that. How would we recommend that a homeschool parent who maybe is not as inclined to think about things critically, and doesn't mean that they're not critical, but you know, and I mean critical in the scientific way, not in the negative way. So you know, how do we as homeschool parents or homeschool teachers, as the case may be, how do we incorporate critical thinking into the curriculum that we use? And hopefully it already exists in the curriculum that we've chosen, but that might not always be the case. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so my younger sister, she has two twin boys. So my 7-year-old nephews are currently going through the whole homeschool process. So she is doing the online school, but she's also doing her own teaching. This is her first time experience, obviously doing that, as a lot of other parents are doing as well. So I've helped her with that. So what I try and do is, if, for example, we're going through flashcards, or we're going through a math problem, or there's a word problem, what I try to do is I align that with what they usually do in their day-to-day activities, you know, whether that's going in the backyard and taking, you know, a display of rocks and doing something that has to do with the word problem, and helping them to see it in real day-to-day life as opposed to just on a piece of paper. That it kind of goes hand in hand even with learning a new language, because sometimes you can be in the classroom, or you can be looking at a sheet of paper to learn a new language, but then when you're actually in the position to speak the language, you have a loss for words, or you're not too sure what to say. So it kind of helps you to take what you're learning and apply it to your day-to-day life. Like, the other day, they love playing hide and seek or tag. And so what I did was I incorporated a word problem. I said, okay, you're going to listen to the details of what I tell you. And I just made up this story, the short story, and I included, you know, the person's name, and if they had a brother or a sister, and if they had a pet. And then I said, I'm going to ask you one question, you know, what kind of pet did they have? And then if they got the question right, I would ask them, did they have a brother or a sister? And then, you know, what happened at the end of the story? And they they were really easy, so they were able to accomplish the questions and get them all right. But even things like that help them to think in the midst of them playing. And that to me helps with critical thinking.
Yeah, so you mentioned a few things there. One of the things that you talked about was incorporating it into everyday life. And I think this
Mhm,
is something sometimes with critical thinking we overthink.
mhm,
And we don't realize that it's actually a very natural thing to do to kind of tie these things together. And we think of everything, and academically it's interesting, we think of everything academically in these nice neat little categories of math, social studies, science, English or language arts, and and all of these things that are separate, but really everything is connected to the rest of it. And so if we separate it out like that, I think we're doing a little bit of a disservice to ourselves and to our students or to our children by not seeing how it incorporates. And one of the some of the most interesting projects that I've seen done by homeschoolers are projects like building a tiny house
mhm,
or something like that, where you actually incorporate all these things together. And it can be as much, having a garden, and it could be a little container garden. Get a couple of buckets and say, okay, this is your project for the spring or whatever it is. And having to, just you incorporate the math into that, you incorporate your understanding of instructions. You have to use your language by reading instructions or by listening to instructions. And so I think that's very good. Incorporating things together is really kind of the first step
mhm.
of critical thinking. And the last part that you were talking about was, remind me what that was. You were saying,
I so I chose a game that they love to play, and then I just decided, hey, I'm going to tell you a story, answer the questions, then we'll play the game again. And then I did it again, and then let's play the game again. So I just kind of snuck it in there so that they can practice thinking even in the
mm-hmm.
midst of playing their favorite game.
Right. So that's where I was going to go with that. I was like, I knew there was something there. Speaking of critical thinking, right? You got to remember what you're talking about. But yeah, exactly. So when you're going through anything, observation,
Mhm,
that is the skill of observation. Can you observe what is happening? Can you tell me what I did wrong? This is one thing kids love, to be able to catch you and do the
mhm,
gotcha thing. And so give them the opportunity to do that. And
mhm,
go through the motions of something and have them tell you when something is not right or when something is different from
mhm,
another scenario. Or that's why they like the little projects of, look at this picture and look at this picture and tell me what is not the same in these two pictures. Tell me what's different from one to the next. And so I think that giving them the opportunity to do that in real life is really, really valuable.
mhm.
um,
Yeah.
for, for me it's interesting too, because I believe that we are born naturally critical thinkers. And my evidence of that is in the fact that kids are notorious for asking the question why, right? So when,
Yeah.
when you have a toddler who's just learning how to speak and you say, don't do that, why? Because if you do that, you're going to get hurt. Why? Well, because everything is why, but it's critical thinking. They're asking
Mhm,
why. So when do we stop asking why? So I don't know that it's even as much of a matter of teaching critical thinking as it is nurturing critical thinking that we naturally have, because we all
mhm,
want to do it, but we get to the point where we're afraid because we're
mhm,
afraid of being wrong. And
mhm.
so at some point in our life, in our education, in our experience, we hit this point where we say, I'm tired of being told, no, that is not correct. And so we just don't
Yeah.
try anymore. And so I think this is what really comes into play with, when we're talking about critical thinking. It's really just it's a matter of talking about how to um, bring back that childlike innocence and that interest um, in getting the answers to life. Just the natural answers to life that we used to ask so freely and not have any problems with, but then somewhere in there, we became insecure, and we said,
Mhm,
oh, I don't want to be the one that they say, no, that's not right. Why did you say it that way? That's not right. So I think I am not a fan of some of the the newer processes of teaching where everything is correct, because I don't think that's
Yeah.
the case, and that is counter to critical thinking. So some of the curriculum and some of the education sort of tactics that have been brought up in the last decade or so are kind of, the idea everybody's a winner. We don't want to give anybody bad grades, but because if we give them bad grades, then it's going to thwart their natural inquisitive, critical thinking. And but that's still thwarting critical thinking, because if you're not allowing them to be critical and understand that there is right and there is wrong within
Mm-hmm.
critical thinking. I can have an opinion, but opinion is not fact. But both of those are very important components of critical thinking. One is not wrong and one is not right. They're both necessary for critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But we sometimes get into this idea as educators, or, as parents, or as people that just want the best for the children, saying, oh, well, we don't want to make them feel bad, so I can't say, no, that is not right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the other extreme where they always say, no, that's not right. It has to be exact. And I found a lot out about teaching critical thinking when I was teaching English as a second language.
Mm-hmm.
And in teaching English as a second language, I learned very quickly. Well, and I was teaching in Haiti, and my university students, Haiti is a traditionally oral, I mean, most societies are traditionally oral, but it is a traditionally oral society in which um, it is um, the memorization is
Mm-hmm.
is the key, right? So everything is relayed by rote, because there aren't a lot of books available, just as a standard. Then everything is passed on really by rote. So teachers teach by having you repeat back. So it's really a matter of, of memorization. And so the memorization, the ability to memorize, and the ability to repeat back and create and kind of store enormous amounts of data in your mind is phenomenal in Haiti. So what I realized is that they were testing and they were doing quizzes really, really well, but they could not use the language. And kind of what you said, they're afraid of using the language because they're
Mm-hmm.
afraid of being wrong. And so I went into class and I said, that's it. No more quizzes, no more exams, no more papers, no more nothing like that. It's all going to be based on, can you use the language? If you can use the language, then we're having success. If you can't use
Mm-hmm.
the language, I don't care how well you know your conjugations. It's not
Yeah.
helping you, because the whole point of language is to be able to use it. And I think that's the same thing with everything else. We need to look at knowledge as the whole point of knowing this is to be able to use it. If your kids are able to test on the Constitution and give you, all the details on the Constitution, but they can't explain why it's important, I don't think you've succeeded.
Mm-hmm.
That's my personal.
Right. Yeah.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
I like what you said about giving the students an opportunity to correct us in the sense that, for example, if you have two pictures and they have to circle the differences in the pictures, if you say, oh, is that a difference? And even if you know the answer, but allowing them to say, no, that's not a difference. See, they're the same. I'm like, oh, okay, thank you. So which one is different? And then they can choose, oh, okay, you're right. So then they have confidence and they practice at a young age so that when they get older and they're in school or at their job and they see something, rather than getting insecure or doubting themselves, they can just confidently raise their hand and say, hey, I have a question. Can I ask why, picture A is different than picture B? Because I think they look the same. And sometimes we look at that student who asks that question so confidently and we're like, wow, how are they able to do that? Because I would growing up, I would get scared, like, oh, I'm just thinking, I'm looking into it too much, or my answer is not right, or they're going to laugh at me, or all of these just
Mhm.
different things. And, those are the select students where they're confident or they ask the question and the student or the teacher actually says, oh, actually, yeah, you're right. Thank you for pointing that out. I didn't catch that. And
Mhm.
so I really like that you said that because that's something that we can really be intentional about doing.
And that was one of the things that I told my students. I would say, well, and again, in that case, it was often in the English class, and I was just getting them, trying to get them to talk anyhow. And so I would come, basically, my approach was just bring up these very controversial issues,
Mhm.
or they weren't necessarily controversial, but a lot of times they were. And it could be even funny controversial, like, relationship
Mhm.
issues, and, well, this is what women think, this is what men think, and then just write something just completely blatantly. It could be just somebody's opinion, and maybe they agree with it, but they don't
Mhm.
actually want to say it, but maybe they don't agree with it, and just put it on the board and say, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
And it could be just the craziest thing, that, statement that I heard somebody say or something, and I'd say, okay, this is what somebody said, what do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? They love to have those conversations because they were humorous, they were funny, but
Yeah.
sometimes they were serious too. Sometimes we'd talk about current events, or we talk about real life, what was happening,
Mhm.
and say, okay, what do you think? What are the solutions? And maybe there's not one. But my response was always, I don't care if you agree with me or not. Because if I can get you to disagree with me, that means you have to use your language and you have to use your logic. And then I've won. It doesn't matter if we agree in the end or not, as long as I've gotten you to think. And in that case, think in English or communicate with me in English, then we're succeeding. But and I think that we can do the same thing with homeschool, even if we're speaking the same language.
Mhm.
I think that that's a big part of it, is if you can get your kids to disagree with you respectfully,
Mhm.
and let them know that, okay, you can go ahead and disagree with me, but you better have your argument together. You better have done your research, because if you can't do your research, it's not going to work. And there was actually advice that I had given. I'm trying to think of who it was, but there was one of my students that came to me and said, I'm trying to get my parents to let me do XYZ, right? And they said, and it actually might have been one of my nieces or nephews. I'm trying to think of who actually asked me this, but they said, I'm trying to get my parents to do XYZ. And I said, your parents want you to think. And if they tell you you can't do something, it's because they've put thought into it and they've decided that this is the ultimately going to help you. If you can come up with an argument, and I don't mean being argumentative, but I mean a supported argument where you say, okay, I understand your position,
Mhm.
however, this is my position, and I would like to offer this as a counter argument to your position, and perhaps make a compromise. Now, ultimately, your parents win because they're the
Mhm.
boss. I mean, that's the rules. As the parents
Yeah.
win, they're like the Supreme Court, right? Once it gets to the Supreme Court, they make their ruling. That's it. But you can give your argument. You can present your evidence, and you can say, this is why I think that this punishment was too much, or whatever it happened to be.
Mhm.
And yeah, it was in one of my recent classes. I remember now what it was. It's one of the students was saying, well, how do I explain to my parents that, I'm being punished, and the whole family's being punished for not doing something, but I was the one that did it when they weren't doing it, and so I shouldn't have to have the same punishment as them and everything. And again, I said, your parents want you to think. If you can demonstrate to them that you're being respectful, but you're also using your brain, and you can present an argument to them and say, what do you think about this? Would this not be beneficial to me? I think that that is going to go much further than just saying that's not fair, right?
Mhm.
Because life is not fair, and that's what you're going to get from your parents. They're going to say life is not fair. Sorry, honey. We all deal with
Yeah.
stuff that we don't want to deal with, and that's just the way it is. So yeah, I think encouraging kids and allowing them to have a little bit of dissent, respectful dissent, that's a difficult thing, but it is something that is so needed. We need to know how to have dissent. We need to know how to disagree, and also we need to know how to be disagreed with.
Mhm.
And this is a hard thing. Like, very many of us will just, it's blocking or unfriending or cutting people
Mhm.
off. Whether it's people actually in our lives, or it's people, or virtual friends and relationships that we
Right.
have, where we're just like, well, if you don't agree with me, or if you have another political view, or you're voting for XYZ, you can't be on my friends list anymore.
Right.
Well, what is that teaching? What kind of, and we do it with families now. It's
Mhm.
happening with families, where families are just like, Well, I don't talk to them because they vote this way or that way, or I don't talk to them because one time 10 years ago somebody said XYZ to me, you know?
Yeah.
And so we're getting in that same sort of thing where we really can't handle dissent. So I think this is a really valuable tool to teach
Mhm.
to teach our students, and to teach our children.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with that. And it reminds me of, for example, my nephews have the game a Nintendo Switch, right? So it's a very popular game, and many kids have it. And so if they're being grounded, or if they can't play the game for a number of days or a number of hours, it actually gave me an idea to. Next time they want to play the game and they're not allowed to, or let's say they want to play the game an hour earlier, it's something where I can ask them, hey, why do you think you should play this game? Do you think that this game helps you to think about things or to learn? Because we want you to do things that are going to help you and to challenge you. And so I can see what they respond to that. And what I did notice is in my with my nephews, they like to show me what they're doing, and they'll be like, and I'll ask, oh, what are you doing? And then they'll be playing the game, and they're, oh, see Mario, so he's jumping over here because if he jumps that way, then they're going to get him, so he has to go to the castle. And so even that, it's they're playing a game, but even by speaking and verbalizing that, that can help them in the future with just public
Yes.
speaking, and just with looking at something and being able to just say what they're seeing, or describe something, or give directions, or just little things like that. So it's really encouraging to know that even in the things that they do like to do, like watch TV or play video games, or all these things that obviously, if it's takes up too much of your time, that's not good either. But you can still find ways that they can learn from those day-to-day things, like playing video games and watching TV, and things that usually you wouldn't think of as something that they can learn from or increase their knowledge on. But little by little, I think if you input these types of questions and ask them, then they're able to give those answers as to how they're actually learning, and they can be intentional about making it a productive time rather than just a time that's where they're not thinking whatsoever. So.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And this is actually something that I've brought up in other conversations that we've had on the live stream. And that is incorporate the kids' opinion as much as possible.
Mhm.
There were questions about like which kind of curriculum and that sort of thing, what to do with different kinds of curriculum. And my advice with that is ask your kids, what do they want to do? What kind of curriculum is interesting to them? And it's the same for anything. Every time you make guidelines,
Mhm.
get your kids in there and say, okay, now you have to come up with a reason. You have to come up with your why to this.
Mhm.
And that means that they're invested into it. That means, and it can be anything as far as chores,
Mhm.
as easy as chores. It can be anything about, break time. Would you rather have two 15-minute breaks or do you want a 30-minute break?
Mhm.
Or whatever it is, and they have to think about this and they have to say, oh, what would I rather have? Rather than if we as teachers, we as parents make all of the decisions, it doesn't give the kids opportunities to make decisions that don't matter. Because
Mhm.
really 15 minutes versus 30 minutes doesn't matter. But
Mhm.
let them make those decisions because for them it does matter. But
Mhm.
for us, it's not going to hurt anything. It's not going to hurt if your kid makes the wrong decision. There's really not a wrong decision. Or even things about, what time do you think we should get up and start school? If we get up and start school early, and we get it all done, then you have the rest of the day. But if you sleep in, then you're going to be doing school, during the time that your television shows might be on or when your friends
Mhm.
want to talk to you and stuff like that. So what is the advantage? And let them figure it out. Not everything. You can't let kids figure everything out, but there's many things that we can kind of give it to the kids to make that responsibility, that responsible, informed decision, give them the responsibility, and then let them live with the consequences of it, at least for a time. And then say, okay, for this week, we'll do it this way. And then next week, we'll reevaluate and see if that really was the right decision. And
Mhm.
because then that's another part of, and a really important part of critical thinking is being able to admit when you're wrong.
Mhm.
We have to be able to do that. If we
Yeah.
can't say, you know what, that wasn't that great of a decision, that wasn't that great of a reaction, or that wasn't that great of an assumption, then we can't, how are we going to
Yeah.
really have critical thinking? And that happened to me this week. something in the news. There's always something in the news now that is just like, wow, and everybody has an opinion immediately. And I don't even remember what it was. It clearly wasn't that important, but
Mhm.
I found myself having an opinion automatically because I saw evidence in front of me. Well, I didn't see all the evidence. I saw some evidence that some people wanted to give. And I
Mhm.
looked at that and I said, well, yeah, based on that, then this should be the case. And then I got the rest of the evidence and I went, oh, okay,
Mhm.
never mind. Everything that I said, you can just
Yeah.
disregard that because I didn't have all the information. And
Yeah.
so being able to say, okay, you know what, I was wrong about that.
Mhm.
That was a hasty decision, or that was a decision that I made without all the information. And so
Mhm.
let your kids be wrong. And when they are wrong, don't berate them. Don't
Right.
don't say, oh man, why do you always make mistakes? Why do you always pick them wrong? And don't let them do that to each other, because kids will do that to each other. If you have more than one, this is a really big thing. We have to be able to respect each other being wrong too. And when
Mhm.
somebody says, oh, yeah, I was wrong about that. What I said the other day, or what I said yesterday, or what I said earlier today, that was the wrong thing. I shouldn't have said that. They should be congratulated for
Mhm.
realizing that instead of kind of held to this inflexible. I mean, because we all change. And kids
Yes.
especially change. They change like by the minute. They change their
Mhm.
opinion every single minute because they're learning so much and, growing so much and lacking so much of the wisdom and experience that we have. So,
Right.
um, yeah. Do you
I
have any?
like what you said about allowing them to make the small decisions that don't matter, just because making those small decisions that goes even for us as adults. Making those the right decisions that are small that nobody sees. It can actually lead to you being confident and knowing what to do with a big decision or a decision that you have to make suddenly or that catches you by surprise. And so same goes for the students because they're able to remember that they were able to make the decisions for the small things, and now something big is here and they're being asked a question. Do I want to go with that group or with that group? Why? And so for example, I recently took my nephews to two of my friends' homes. One has 5 children, one has 3. And so I asked one of my nephews, Claude, I said, hey, which one did you like going to? Did you like to go to this person's house or this person's house? And he said, oh, I liked this person's house. I said, why? He said, oh, well, they had 5 kids. And then he thought about it. He said, actually, I liked both. And so it was just nice to see that I gave him a choice as to why he liked one of them over the other. But then he was able to just say, you know what, I don't want to choose. I liked both, and so
Hmm.
that was his own decision. And he said, I know it maybe sounded to me like, oh, you have to pick one, but then I encouraged him. I said, hey, good job. That's really good. I'm glad that you liked both because they were each fun in their own way.
Yeah, definitely seeing the pros and cons of, that any position can have good and bad. And that's another thing too, is to be able to congratulate your opposition
Mm-hmm.
and say, you know what, I might disagree with you ultimately, but I appreciate the fact that you came to me with a good argument, or you came to me with a good fact, or you came to me with all the facts, or at least the facts that you could muster. I appreciate that. And I think that's important. We as adults, we as mentors, we as the directors and the shapers of these kids' lives, we need to be able to do that and say, I appreciate that you can change your mind. And I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate that you're thinking about this. Even if you're not necessarily thinking the way I would want you to think, I appreciate that you're thinking about this. And I think as kids get older, we can think about this a little bit on, with younger kids, it's a little more inconsequential, but as kids get older, the stakes get higher. And you end up with kids asking questions, and these are questions that maybe come up through friends, maybe they come up even at church, they might come up through different organizations that they're part of. If they go to school, if they are in a classroom setting, they might come up in that way. They might read a book and something will come up. And I think we really need to be able to let kids evaluate where they stand. And that's actually another question, um, somewhat related to this, but not directly. I'm going to actually read the question here that came up, and it is, what is a natural way to teach kids faith without making it legalistic and meaningless? And this is something that I kind of related to because I grew up in a, pastor's house, and our belief was very legalistic for much of the time. And so, yeah, I guess what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I've experienced, my parents did their best and same thing. We grew up in church, but a lot of what I saw growing up in church was I didn't see that anybody owned up to their mistakes. The pastor seemed like he was perfect. And so obviously when you go into the real world at school, it just doesn't match up and you're like, okay. So anytime that you struggle, then of course the tendency is to feel alone because there isn't that like openness at church or that vulnerability. And now obviously things are very different. So people are open, people have testimonies, they're very open about how God saved them and changed their lives. And, pastors are able to talk openly about that too, or just be open that, hey, I don't have perfect days either, but I'm here and I'm preaching the gospel and this and that. So it's nice to see that in a pastor. Obviously, all pastors are different, but there are some that are open in that way to make us feel like, oh wow, like they're human too, right? So they face similar struggles that we may all feel or struggle with. So I think it's also just like if you're driving with your children and somebody gets angry and cuts you off. So right, that's an opportunity to show faith, like to show that your heart has been changed by the love of Christ, that you can display the gospel in the sense that, okay, Christ loved me at my worst. I don't have to retaliate and yell back at that guy who just did that to me. Maybe he's having a hard day. I'll smile or maybe say sorry, lift up my hand, say sorry, smile. And so
God
our
bless him.
right, yeah, exactly. So obviously, and even if you mess up, even if you're prone to just being like, what are you doing, and yelling, and
Mhm,
that's okay, we're gonna mess up, and just being like, you know what, hey guys, I shouldn't have yelled, like I just wanted to acknowledge that I shouldn't have yelled like
mhm,
that at him. Usually, like if somebody does that, just let them pass by and just
mhm,
pray for him, maybe he's having a hard day. So
mhm.
those type of examples, I think, can help our students or children just seeing that in the real world, like, because you can preach the gospel all day long and read the Bible, but then if you go into the real world and you don't treat people well and you're judgmental and we're not perfect, but if you're just living totally opposite of what the Bible teaches and what the gospel is, then at some point your children or just your students or people in general will kind of be like, hey, like you're not really living out what you're preaching. But at least, we're all imperfect, but at least we're trying and we're acknowledging, oh man, I shouldn't have said that, or I shouldn't have done that, or maybe next time I won't assume that about somebody. I'll just wait to hear more about what happened, or oh, I don't know that person very well, so I don't want to say anything about that, or something where we're able to just learn from our own mistakes and then give that example to our children.
Yeah, definitely. And as you were talking about that, I was thinking too, one of the things that I think we can do is go ahead and teach kids that emotions are natural and
Hmm.
emotions are God-given. And
Hmm.
sometimes we get angry.
Right,
And that's not a bad thing. The Bible does not ever say don't be angry. It just
right.
says you're not supposed to sin as a result of your
Hmm.
anger.
Right.
And so, it's okay to be upset about something. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be depressed. It's okay to be, to feel hopeless. I mean, look, read through the
Right.
Psalms and tell me that hopelessness is not, is not okay. And
Right.
so, you're talking about pastors getting up and being able to say, hey, I went through this week.
Hmm.
And we had, I have a pastor in Minnesota that has done this and has gotten up and said, I was a real jerk to my wife this week,
Hmm.
and I know that I was, and I had to address this, and, or to say, my marriage is not as strong as I thought it was. We're really struggling. And to hear a
Hmm.
pastor say that, it gives two reactions, and it can be a pastor, it can be a parent, it can be anyone. It gives two primary reactions. First of all, we're terrified, because if the person that we look up to sometimes doesn't have it together, how are
Hmm.
we supposed to have it together? And I
Hmm.
think, we have to realize that kids sometimes they look at us like, oh, mom and dad, they always have it together. They never have problems. And kids, believe these things.
Mhm.
There was a time, I think maybe, that I believed them about my own family, or about certain people at least,
Mhm.
where I would look at them and say, oh, they never get angry. I'd look at my friends' families, and
Mhm.
that was usually how it was, because I knew the secrets of my families. But I'd look at their families and I'd say, they never get mad at each other. They never yell at their kids. They're never sad. They're always happy. They always love to be together, and all this kind of stuff. And I truly believed it. And it was devastating when I found out that it was not always the case. But it also was really good for me, because
Mhm.
even though it was hard for me at the time, because we always want to have superheroes as
Right.
our leaders, the ones that never make a mistake, and they
Mhm.
just don't exist. But that helps us to feel like there's something we can achieve that level if we continue to follow them. But we're not going to achieve that level. None of us are ever going to get to that point where we never feel emotions, because emotions are natural and good.
Mhm.
It's how we handle those. It's how we react. It's how we act in those emotional times that determines our character. But then the other reaction that we have is kind of a relief.
Mhm.
And especially once we've gone through a few times of having those kinds of emotions, when if you come from a perspective where you haven't had to deal with a lot of emotion, then it might be very shocking to see somebody you look up to deal with emotion and get angry, or get upset, or get, whatever it happens to be, maybe,
Mhm.
write somebody off that you're like, I don't understand how this is happening. But the other reaction, or the other way that we look at that often, is relief, to say, you know what? I see that this is exactly what has happened with somebody that I look up to, and they experience the same struggles that I experience.
Right.
And I think that does definitely tie into the critical thinking as well,
Mhm.
because if we put unrealistic expectations of a situation or people or whatever it happens to be, and I'll bring it to this, because I think this is, especially now, it seems like politics is on everybody's mind. Even if we try to get away from it, we can't, because it's
Yeah.
just everywhere we turn, in social media and on the news, and just people walking down the street with political messages on their mask, or on their
Mhm.
shirt, or whatever it is. And I think that the problem that we get is we pick a side, and then whatever that side does is right.
Mhm.
And whatever the other side does is evil and wrong. And so you say, this particular person is my candidate, and they cannot do anything wrong. And so you show them evidence, and you say, well, what about this? They said XYZ. Oh, no, 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 no. They said that because blah, 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 blah. And it's interesting, because sometimes I like to watch these videos where they'll go to campuses and they'll say, this candidate says this and this and this and this and this and this and this. And they ask the students, well, what do you think about it? And they're, oh, I think that's terrible. That's awful. Well, would it
Yeah.
surprise you if I told you that actually those statements were said by the other side, not by
Ah.
this candidate? And they go, because
Yeah.
they're going to judge these, oh, there's no excuse to say that. They're racist, they're sexist, they're evil, they're whatever
Right.
they happen to be, and
Right.
they say all of these things, and then they say, oh wait, no, it was actually the other side that said that. And we could do that. Either side can do that. That's the
Mhm.
thing, is at any side of the political debate, and I'm just using politics, either side of the political debate can do that. It's the same with our faith. And this is what we need to realize, is that just because someone is somebody we look up to, does not mean that they cannot do anything wrong.
Mhm.
And once you um, embrace this, and you realize, and you teach your kids that, we may respect a pastor, we may respect a leader, we may respect somebody, that writes these books, or a teacher, or whoever it is, but that does not mean that at some point they can very easily, or they cannot very easily fall,
Mhm.
and they cannot very easily struggle. I mean, look at David.
Mhm.
David was the man who was after God's own heart, and he was so close to God, and there's so much intimacy in all those Psalms that he wrote in his whole life. And he had a falling out that would have been the absolute doom of his political career had it happened today,
Mm-hmm.
with social media and everything that we have.
Right.
There's no way he would have recovered from that. And sometimes I think about that. I'm like, wow, he came back. Not only did he come back, but he ruled for years after that. And then his son inherited it. He wasn't even cursed to the point that his son was not able to inherit it. His son inherited it and was blessed. But, after that,
Right.
David designed the temple and Solomon built it. And so, after he did all these terrible things, but what
Right.
was the difference between him and Saul? It's that he
David.
repented.
Yeah.
He
Right.
repented and he said, "You're right. I messed up."
Mm-hmm.
When the prophet came to him and said, "Hey," and it's funny because the prophet did the same thing that I told you that these people go to the campuses and do. They say, "So there was this guy, hypothetical guy, and he did X, Y, Z. What would you say about this guy?" And David said, "Oh, he's a bad guy. He should get this punishment." And the prophet said, "Yeah, that was you." And he immediately recognized it and said, "You're right. That was me." And he
Mm-hmm.
repented. What happened with Saul is
Yeah. When.
Saul said, excuse, 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 excuse. It wasn't my fault. It was the
Mm-hmm.
prophet's fault. The prophet didn't show up. What else was I supposed to do? You put me in this position. I had to make a decision.
Yeah. Blame shifting. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's so often what happens. And
Mm-hmm.
this happens with pastors, this happens with parents. And I think it's a very important, and it happens with teachers. And I think it's a very important thing that we need to understand the power of repentance
Yeah.
and the
If.
power of admitting that we're wrong. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was gonna say it frees us too, and then it's a great example for somebody else because then they're encouraged too. Like, wow, I don't have to hide. I don't have to pretend like I can do everything perfectly because I can't, right?
Mhm.
So we can just even if wrong was done to us, oh, my life is like this because of this person. Had this person not hurt me, I wouldn't be this way. Yes, there are, unfortunately, there are effects to how someone may have treated us or what's been done to us, but we can then own up to if we hurt someone else. Oh, I hurt you because this person hurt me and that's all I knew. It's just looking at that person and saying, hey, I shouldn't have treated you that way, I'm sorry, and just owning up to your own doing, and then and forgiving that person with the power of God. We can't do that in our own strength, but just learning about forgiveness and learning about how we've been forgiven. So yeah, there is so much power in repentance. Thank God for that. Thank God that we have hope in that. And I like what you said with the political parties. It's like that's why it's so nice to just be honest. Hey, if you are going for one political party and the runner-up said something, it's okay to say, hey, I'm voting for him, but maybe he shouldn't have said that.
Right.
Maybe that wasn't the best thing to say as a president,
Mhm.
or maybe he shouldn't joke that way, but what he stands for is what I want for the country, so that's what I'm going to vote for. I don't look at him like a spiritual leader. I look at my pastor as a spiritual leader. But if he's a candidate for presidency, I'm going to vote for who I think should be president based off of what I believe America should be built on.
Mhm.
And so that goes into that as well. But I'm very grateful to hear about repentance and just the reminder. It's always it just boosts my spirit to hear about the reminder of God's love and repentance and how David had such a bright future despite what he did. I mean, so many people believe the lie of Satan, like, oh, your life's done, this is over, and they just go in the wrong direction. And when you choose to believe God's word over Satan's lies, God's plans are so much higher than ours, and He uses everything for our good and for His glory for those who are called according to His purpose. Romans 8:28. And so there's just so much hope in that. That's a great reminder.
Absolutely. And there is nothing that you can do that's going to
Mhm.
separate you from God.
Yeah.
Just there's nothing that has that ability to do that. So,
Hmm.
and also your children. There's nothing that you're. This is an important thing. I've had this conversation with my mom. My mom is a worrier,
Hmm.
and she's, it's from love. It's from a place of concern and love. But she's a worrier, and I think a lot of moms are. And she'll get into. She has a lot of kids and grandkids and great grandkids to worry about.
Yeah.
And so she'll get into these, situations. Well, I don't, what I'm just so worried about the choices that they're making. And I have told her, because I've been there, I've been on the other side of that, of her worry. You know, I've been the object of her worry more than a few times.
Mhm.
And I told her there is nothing that they can do that is the end of the world.
Mhm.
Literally. There's nothing that they can do that is the end of the world. They could make some really bad decisions and have some really dire consequences, but it's not the end of the world. And we have to remember this. We have to remember this as teachers. We have to remember this as parents. We have to remember this just as leaders, as people in general. This is for everybody.
Mhm.
There is nothing somebody can do that is the end of the world. That
Mhm.
comes separates them from salvation. There's
Mhm.
not, you know, that separates them from the gift of salvation. It's always there for them. You know, that there's nothing there that, and I think when we let our kids know this, it's first of all, you got to teach them the critical thinking, you know, and you have to teach them consequences. You have to teach them, you know, that yes, you are free to choose what you want to do, but you are not free from the consequences of your of your
Mhm.
decisions. Whatever you choose, you know, you still have consequences for those, and let them figure it out. And when they start to question some of the morality or some of the things that you might hold on to very strongly, let them know, you know what, I'm going to disagree with you, but I'm not going to disrespect you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to push you to research that more. I'm going to push you to come back to me with your own argument for or against it. And what might happen, and this is a really hard thing, because they might actually come up with some stuff you haven't thought about, and that's going to force you to actually to analyze your own position on that and whatnot as well. But that's good for us. We all need to
Mhm.
constantly be looking at our position and our viewpoints and our
Yeah.
pet doctrines and say, you know what, maybe that's not such a good thing to believe after. Oh, I've changed so many things just
Mhm.
because people have come to me and said, you know, well, what about this? And I looked at it and went, that doesn't actually match with what I believe, but this is evidence. And I have to
Right.
weigh the evidence. I have to look at the evidence, you know, or I have to, you know, if I can't disprove the evidence,
Mhm.
then my view has to align with it, you know, and if it doesn't, then there's something wrong with what I'm thinking.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think those are two topics that definitely fit in very well together. So there's a topic that's kind of completely different, and I want to get us you know, off this and into something a little, maybe a little bit lighter. Well, maybe it's not later. I don't know. This was actually a question that just came up today. There was a parent that was talking and said, I've been doing this homeschooling thing for 3 weeks, 4 weeks now, and I've gotten to the point where when I wake up in the morning, I dread the day. I am so burnt out. My kids are burnt out. I don't know how I'm going to deal with this. I hate homeschooling. I've been doing it for 3 weeks. I hate it. What are you going to tell those parents?
Well, here in Arizona, just from what I know about homeschool, for example, my friend who has 5 kids, she had mentioned that she doesn't do the online school, but she uses her own curriculum. So she says that where she actually teaches her children, I believe 3 of them are in school. She said that when she teaches her children, there are 3 hours that she teaches them hands on where they're at the table learning, but then in between those 3 hours she allows them to go in the backyard and find different colored rocks and then express like how or explain how the rocks are different, or let's wash the dishes. How many dishes did you wash? Let's practice some math, something where it's not just sitting down the entire time. So maybe I'm not sure how she's going about it. Maybe that's something that she can try, or maybe I know for me, sometimes I put more pressure on myself than of what's really going on, and I don't know if that's the case for her. But maybe even just cutting what she has to do in half, or just being thankful with the fact that she was able to teach them that day for 2 hours, and then starting a little smaller and then growing, as opposed to maybe feeling like you have so much to cover and then you're doing it like not with the right attitude, or maybe everyone's flustered, or everyone's kind of like trying to rush through it, and you're just there's different ways that you can try and about it. And I don't know that this is the case for her, any of the situations that I had talked about, but maybe she can just try to do it a little bit differently than she has. Or choose to start later in the day, and just be like, hey, this morning we're just going to enjoy ourselves. We're going to talk about some things, talk about what we're grateful for. And then we're going to start today at 10 a.m. instead of 8 a.m. or 11 a.m. or give the choice to the children as to what they want to start. Maybe just trying some different tactics. But I think that's a great question, because especially as parents who feel that weight and they feel overwhelmed and they don't know if they're doing it right. And I
Yeah.
think the fact that parents are just homeschooling in general is amazing, because not everyone was equipped for this, not everyone knows how to do this, and they little do they know that them even teaching 1 hour of homeschool, that's amazing, that's great,
Yeah.
and then so I think it's just, I think maybe sometimes we have like expectations of ourselves, or we're comparing, or um we think it should be this way and we're not enough, or just different thoughts that we all deal with at times. And so I think it's just being grateful that, wow, like I never thought last year, I never would have thought that I would even be in the situation. And like, I'm just thankful that I was able to get through this book with my children, or they were able to finish this one task today. Like, just being grateful for those little things.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the time. I think that a lot of new homeschool parents are thinking, oh, my kid goes to school for 8 hours a day, so now I have to
Hmm.
school them for 8 hours a day. No, you don't. If you try to do that, everybody's going to go crazy because at
Hmm.
school, they have a lot of breaks. They have time in between. They have lunchtime. They have recess. They have gym. They have all of these different
Hmm.
kinds of things that are happening in between there. So the actual sit down and school time is a lot less than we might think. And we know when there's a classroom full of 20 kids and one teacher, it's even less than that, the
Right.
amount of time that the teacher actually gets them to focus. So I would be overjoyed with 3 hours a day
Hmm.
with your own kids in the house.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that that's actually more than what many kids need. With my mom, and I've mentioned this before, I would just sit there because she'd say, okay, you have to work this many hours. And it was, again, a certain amount of time that she would have to mark down how many hours I worked for homeschooling each day. And she wanted to keep, this was when she first started, she wanted to keep everything, keep all the records just right and do everything the way that she needed to do. And so she put in there, she would say, okay, your 8 hours or 7 hours or whatever it was that I had to do. And so I would just sit there and do nothing.
Hmm.
I do absolutely nothing. And she's like, I can't get her to do anything. So finally she said, you know what? I don't care how much time, just finish your work. When you finish your work, you can go. You can do what you want to do. And for me, going was riding horse or working in the garden or reading college level books because that's what I did for fun or, whatever it was. But, and
Yeah.
I was learning so much with that, but it was the book learning that was boring for me because I had to do it. So
Right.
sometimes it just might be a matter of, hey, when you finish this project, you're done.
Right. Mhm.
And let them figure out how quickly they want to go because some kids they are they're not getting it because they're so bored. And once you give them that and you say, okay, all you have to do is this, once you do it, you understand it, you finish it, you're done, you can do what you want after that. But
Mhm.
another thing is, remember, they're sick of seeing your face just as much as you're sick of seeing their face. That's the reality. And it's even not much worse with COVID now because they've seen your face for 6 months, right?
Mhm.
And so give them a chance to get away from you. And this is where things like online classes really, really helps. You know, Luma Learn plug, right? But
Mhm.
give your kids a chance to see somebody else. So you might not need someone else to teach your kids phonics, but if you can find an online class that helps to get them where they don't have to look at you for that 45 minutes or hour or whatever it is once a week, that
Mhm.
can be a real break from them. And it can be a break from you too, because
Oh yeah.
you're not having to think about that one class. That class is taken care of by somebody else. And, maybe it's one class a week that you do for the kid, but that helps you to kind of take that break. Um, but another thing that I did, this was actually something I did with my university students again. I had a particular class that I could not get to interact with me. I couldn't get them motivated. I would ask them questions and I would just get like this look from everybody. Like no response. They were just like, we have, or they were just not paying attention or whatever. And finally, after a couple weeks, I said, I finished. I quit. I'm not going to do this anymore. I am not going to teach this class anymore. You are going to teach the class. and I actually flipped it around, and this is a huge, um,
Oh, yeah.
I think this is so underutilized. Make your kids teach you, because
Mm.
then they have to
Mhm.
know the topic. And we know as teachers, we learn the topic much better when we're teaching the topic.
Yeah.
So if you want to learn history, teach history, because then you're forced to learn it, because your students are going to be asking you the questions that you need to know about, and that will help you learn that much better. If you want to learn a language, you teach. I didn't know English really until I was teaching English, and then I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's why we do that. Okay, now I understand, because I would have to research. Have your kids teach you. If you're in a history curriculum, you say, okay, tomorrow I'm not going to teach this lesson. You're going to teach me this lesson. Have them do the work, because they will learn so much more that way. In fact, I think you should do this with almost everything. I mean, there's certain things you have to walk them
Yeah.
through, but have them teach you how to read, or have them teach each other how
Right.
to read. Have your older kids teach your younger kids.
Hmm.
And even if they're within a grade of each other, you can school them together, but you also can say, okay, you know this topic, you're going to teach them. And then they know this topic, they're going to teach you. You can go back and forth and exchange that. If there's a much bigger gap, you can use that as part of the schooling for your older kids, is to have them teach the younger kids, because they're going to learn so much in leadership and communication, and even just solidifying some of the things that they know. So don't be afraid to quit. And
Yeah.
sometimes don't be afraid to say, you know what, this day sucks, and we all agree that this day sucks. So everybody get your jackets. We're going to get in the car and get ice cream.
Right.
That's it. That's it.
Yep.
We can't do it. We're going to take a break. This is a
Yeah.
day off. We need to take the break, and
Hmm.
understand that sometimes you got to do that, or
Yeah.
go to the park, and check your guidelines, because we don't want you to get in any trouble with
Right.
any social distancing, stay at home orders. But I think a lot of that has been lightening up. But
Yeah.
try, just get out of the house, go to the park, run around for a little bit, and then maybe you can come back and say, okay, now we're going to do something, or watch a
Right.
movie and then talk about the movie and say, okay, now what did you think about this? Use it as a
Mhm.
critical thinking
That's
exercise.
great.
So,
Yeah, that's amazing. That's great. I think that's great, and I think that that helps a lot of parents, and it even encourages me I'm a potential parent to be, right. So if I choose to homeschool my children, God willing, then I feel like, wow, I can do that. If it
right.
doesn't have to be so picture perfect, like I had it in my mind, like, oh, I could never
Mhm.
do that. No way, right? So now I'm it's more of like, okay, I can actually do that. It isn't, and if the date isn't perfect, that's okay. Like you said, let's just pause it for now. It's not going well. One's crying, hungry. Let's just go. Let's go
Mhm.
somewhere and just change the scenery, right? Feel the air, feel the fresh air. And like you
Mhm.
said, I think that's amazing. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, there's some families that actually do what they call car schooling, where
Uh,
they just drive, or they go on vacation, and okay, this week we're going to go take a drive to such and such a place, and the kids have to read the map, and the kids have to figure out how much gas we need for XYZ, and they have to figure out our budget to buy snacks, whatever it is. They're going to
right.
find the places that we need to go visit. So say, okay, we're going to drive to wherever it is you're going to drive to. Now you guys research, and each of you decide a place that you want us to visit. Where do you want us to go, and why? So you're going to be our
Hmm.
tour guide for that place. That is school. They're learning history,
Yeah.
they're learning natural sciences, they're learning sociology, they're learning all sorts of different kinds of stuff. They're learning math and
Yeah.
economics. So, have them use everyday regular life to yeah, re re-emphasize their learning and their education. So I think one of the biggest things that homeschool parents, and especially now, like you said, we have so many new homeschool parents, and there's so many people that are just panicked, because they're like, how do I do this? They didn't want to do this. And this
Hmm.
is a big problem that we have, I think. A lot of the homeschool parents now did not really buy into this. They didn't do this because they wanted to, because they made the decision. They're doing this, a lot of them are doing this because they have to. They
Hmm.
don't have another option, or they don't have
Right.
a viable option. And so the important thing to understand is, life is not Instagram. Life is not Pinterest. It's not going to look like that. It will
Hmm.
never look like that. The people who have that, if you look behind the camera, you would see the mess and the disaster,
Mhm.
right? I mean,
Right.
they know how to squish everything to one corner and then say, okay, we'll take a picture over on the other side. But that's not reality. I mean, life
Mhm.
happens. And so live your life. You know your kids, you're going to be great. You're going to do the
Yep.
best because you love them more than anyone else loves them. And so, just go for it and trust yourself and trust your kids. You're going to
Yeah,
be
exactly. Awesome.
Yeah, all right. Well, this was a good talk. It was
Yes.
good to see you again, Christina, and
Nice to see you too.
enjoy your time of teaching, and we'll see all of our viewers then in the future.
Okay, awesome, Priscilla. Thank you so much. See you next
Thank you.
time. Are
You
you
too.
welcome? Bye.
Yes.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.